when the skunk came into the courtroom? Anyone know? He said, odor in the court.
Oh. Oh.
What is that joke?
Can we please delete that?
Now start recording.
Oh, go ahead.
Nothing personal, Dan. Okay.
Dan, did your grandchildren, as you were teaching them swimming, give you that one?
Yeah. Actually, it came off a joke of the day from my granddaughter's school. So.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's fun that they're sending a joke of the day. That's a great idea.
Yeah, they do.
So I think it's officially time for us to begin. So why don't we begin with a blessing for our study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. And thank you all for remembering our new time. I hope you enjoyed your extra hour of whatever you did with that extra half hour, drinking coffee, reading the newspaper, going.
Bonnie, I cannot begin to tell you how much I am grateful for that hour. This is reasonable.
Okay. Very good. So we are in Leviticus 26. We've thoroughly examined the first two verses, and now we've entered into Bechukotai, a new parsha beginning with the third verse, and we've spent a significant amount of time on that first verse. Im Bechukotai telechu, if you walk in my ways and observe my commandments and do them. And now we're moving into all of the wonderful benefits that are going to come to us as a consequence of our obedience and observance. And we talked about reward and punishment and what our beliefs might be about reward and punishment for our participation or lack of participation in the mitzvot. And we finished up with a text from Zelig Pliskin commenting on that idea of walking in our ways, that even the time when we're in transition, when we're moving from one activity to another, whether we're driving, whether we're walking, that there are opportunities in there for study, for learning, for spiritual growth. So we're moving on now to verse 4, very appropriate for those of us in Phoenix who are enjoying some rain. And interesting, so what we're going to look at now is a long series of the blessings that will come to us as a consequence of our study, and then an even longer list of the curses, I shouldn't say study, our observance, and then a longer list of the curses that will afflict us if we do not observe the commandments. And I'm just going to show and tell a book here for a minute. I just finished looking at this book by Simon Sebag Montefiore. It's called Jerusalem, the Biography. And it's the history of the city of Jerusalem as told through the lens of various inhabitants. Mystics and messiahs, the Crusaders, all the way back to Abraham and Melchizedek, and of course the Jewish kings David and Solomon. So it's in the giveaway pile. So if there's anybody who is interested in acquiring the copy of this book, I'm happy to pass it on. We can arrange for you to get it. So just reach out privately. But what made me think of that? Oh, because we look at the terrible depictions. Montefiore really brings a lot of life to the images in, let's say, the Book of Lamentations, describing the debauchery and the violence of the destruction of Jerusalem. And he made it very, very real for me in reading this text. And so when we look at some of these curses, and when we look at when was the Torah written, when was this document compiled, it seems, at least according to Montefiore, that what we read in the Torah about what's going to happen, the consequences of disobedience, very much reflects the time when it was written, or describing the actual destructions of Jerusalem. And it just made it very graphic and real to me. So if you're interested in reading some terrible, and somebody mentioned child sacrifice, the elements of child sacrifice that were prevalent in the ancient world, he also addresses those. So anyway, the book is available before it's in the donation pile, so you just let me know. But we start nicely with the blessings. So let's move with all the blessings. We should be positively motivated, and very apropos for here, this moment, this little bit of a rainy morning. The first thing is in verse 4. I'll give you the rains in their season. So rain, of course, is a fundamental blessing. We're in an agricultural society, so without great irrigation resources. So rain really equals life. Without the rain, there's no food. Without the food, there's no life possible. So the rain is vitally important. And notice the rain in its season. So that is also important, because if the rain comes not in its season, then it's not a blessing, then it is a curse in itself, because it can ruin the crops. So it's a very, very delicate balance. So we're reminded of the importance of the delicate balance in nature on which we are dependent. And for those of us who live in the desert, we exponentially can appreciate the importance of rain, more so than my mom in New York, who gets more than enough rain, and the rain more often than not is a negative factor, because it interferes with her ability to get out for a walk. Although she has been known this week to go for a walk even in the rain. Hi, Mandy, welcome. Pretty background you have there. Well, that's beautiful. So, so the rain, we want the rain in its season. In Phoenix, we get it. We live in a parallel environment to our desert ancestors, and we know that the rain is a blessing. When the rain comes, everything else stops, and we just enjoy and exult in the rain. In the morning prayer service, we get to that prayer that's Nishmat Kol Chai Tevarech et Shimcha, the soul of every living thing praises you. And there's a line in that prayer that says that we thank God for the Elef Alfei Brachot, the thousands upon thousands of blessings that we enjoy. And that is classically understood as a reference to the raindrops, the thousands upon thousands of blessings, that every single raindrop is its own blessing. So if we obey, first thing, food is a fundamental need that we have. Those of you who have studied with me before know that those couple of famous quotes about food that always stay with me. So the first one is unattributed. I read it and it was not attributed. I've never found the author, but no food, one problem. Enough food, many problems. Mm-hmm. No food, one problem. If you don't have food, you have only one problem. Where are you going to get food? Where is the next meal coming from? It's only once we have the luxury of knowing that we have enough food that we have the luxury of having other problems. So it makes sense that the rain is the priority fundamental blessing that the Torah offers us in exchange for our obedience, because the rain means that we'll have adequate food to eat. And then once our bellies are full, we can move on to have a luxury of other needs. But without food, we have only one need. And again, going back to this Montefiore book, he even describes cannibalism and, just a horrific image of what people will be reduced to if they don't have enough food. All the things that we think we like to eat, we don't like to eat. You think about when people are in desperate situations and the things that they will be reduced to eat. And, we may think we're snobby, but the reality is, if we were starving, there's all kinds of things that we never imagined that we could eat, that we would eat under duress. So the other saying is Mahatma Gandhi, who said that there are people in the world who are so poor that God can only appear to them in the form of bread.
Oh, God, that's beautiful.
Okay, and I got a taker on my my copy of the book, so we'll we'll coordinate for how you can pick that up sometime.
Couldn't be Lisa, could it, with that big grin on her face?
No, she got beat to the punch.
Oh, really? Okay.
I may be exiled to a backyard shed if I bring any more books in the house.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So food. So you'll get your rains and the land will give forth its produce. The trees and the field will give forth fruit. So it does beg the question of the connection between human behavior and meteorology, which probably most of us are not ready to accept that there's a direct correlation. And that, of course, is why the Reform movement removed the second paragraph of the Shema from its prayer books, up to and including the contemporary Mishkan Tefillah. So let me just grab the... So if you look in Mishkan Tefillah, the Reform prayer book, at the Shema, we have the first paragraph, the V'ahavta. We have the third paragraph about the tzitzit. But the second paragraph, V'haya im shamoa, if you obey my commandments, that expands on this exact theme that we're reading about here in Leviticus. That prayer is nowhere to be found in the Mishkan Tefillah. And there are a lot of people who really mourn the loss of that paragraph. And Temple Chai, when we produced our own Siddur, added that back in. So the Temple Chai Kabbalat Shabbat Siddur, which Marcy lovingly formatted every single word of Hebrew and English in this document, does include this paragraph. And as I said, we have the wonderful Zalman Schachter Shalomi translation of the prayer, but how good it will be when you really listen to all my directions, which I give you today, for loving Adonai, your God, and to act godly with feeling and inspiration. Your earthly needs will be met at the right time, appropriate to the season. You will reap what you've planted for your delight and health. So if you obey, you'll have plenty of food.
Rabbi, what was the rationale for omitting that from the Siddur?
So the reform movement felt that we don't believe that meteorology is controlled by human behavior. So they kind of understood it in a literal sense that if we're good, we'll be rewarded by abundance, and if we do the wrong thing, then text continues, the heavens will be shut up, and we won't have rain, and we won't have food, and I think it was a consequence of a literal, maybe a too literal reading of that text. But Mishkan Tfilah was published not that long ago, 2007, so 13 years, maybe a little while ago, but it's contemporary. So even 13 years ago, the reform movement could not find its way to bring that paragraph back into the liturgy. So I'm gonna stop for just a moment to see if people have responses. And in particular, I'm thinking about climate change.
Yes.
And the threat to our environment from human behavior, and wondering if maybe the Torah knew something that we need to actually take to heart a bit more.
I don't know if it's connected or not, but if God is in charge of what's going on right now, he's really pissed off about something.
Murder hornets.
My favorite.
I think when you said earlier, Rabbi, that there's a correlation between human behavior and climate, there absolutely is. I mean, we're seeing huge amounts of documentation, hard data that shows that. It doesn't mean that it's causal, although clearly the stronger a correlation becomes, the closer you get to being able to call something causal. But nowhere in all of research and statistics is there a statement about causality. Never happens. So, but strong correlation is exactly that, a strong correlation. As I read this, however, I think that it seems to me that it's talking about individual behavior, that if you do this, or if you don't do this, then
Interesting.
it will happen to you personally rather than to the society as a whole. And I think that from that standpoint, both perspectives apply. That, yeah, if a lot of people behave in a certain way, it's going to have an impact on the climate. But if one person, it's one person's interaction with Hashem that I think is what this is speaking to, rather than the bigger climate issue. But I'm going to stop there.
I've read a couple times that the fact that we're all not driving has helped some of the air pollution.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm thinking about communal versus individual responsibility as we talk about this. And I think there's like this sort of grand message in here. I always saw that, Owen, as a communal conversation. But the communal doesn't exist without the individuals within the community acting in accordance with the whatever.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We're saying the same thing.
Okay.
I'm thinking.
Good. I don't want to get on the other side of Owen.
Oh, you can get on any side of me. I love you no matter what.
Yeah, as long as it's a 6 feet.
Just don't circle him 7 times.
Yeah,
I promise.
Felix, you were going to say?
What I'm thinking about is in terms of developmental psychology, the younger the child is, the more the child might need extrinsic reward and punishment for good deeds, bad deeds. But as the child grows older, more intrinsic values start to take hold. So the person starts to be good for good sake and tries to avoid hurting people because it's wrong, not because they're going to suffer something for it.
And I always go back to the fact that this time in history and this point in this people's journey was very childlike.
Yeah.
They were just beginning to develop.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. You know, as we were talking last week about Noah versus Abraham, walking with God versus walking before God, and the idea of, you know, the younger you are, the more guidance and direction you need. And I'm thinking also about, you know, my grandson Michael is 3 years old. He still has to get an M&M every time he goes in the potty. You know, Helena is almost 5. It wouldn't occur to her that she should get a reward every time she uses the toilet. You know, she's just incorporated that as a value and a practice into her own life. So you're absolutely right. In fact, I was with Michael the other day and he offered me a reward after using the bathroom, you know. Don't I want an M&M?
Or Hershey Kiss is another one.
In terms of our development as a country, we can think of the United States as somewhere in the adolescent years right now.
That explains a lot.
Boy, and are we fudging it up?
But Terry, you mentioned, you know, this virus and God being
Well, I was thinking of climate as well as the virus.
Yeah.
I almost don't see them as separate.
And my daughter Sarah says, I don't know if this is statistically true, that about every 100 years or so, there's some kind of a virus or a pandemic like this. And,
yes.
You know, her comment was, it's, you know, God's way of saying, you know, there's too many of you.
We talked about that Wednesday with Darren, and somebody said, well, what was the plague 200 years ago? And
right.
And it was yellow fever, and 100 years ago it was the Spanish flu,
right?
And now we have coronavirus. So I meant to go back and see if I could go further back, but I haven't had the opportunity to do that. But it would be interesting to see how far back that holds.
And this is where I love, again, I always bring him up, but the Rami Shapiro concept of God is everything.
Yeah.
Lends this science of cleansing, or this cycle, and even more, to me, it's even more godly because it's not a God directing things, but it's the godness of the whole world, of the planet that we live on, that has to take care of things when we get out of hand.
The bubonic plague was 1455.
Thank you.
Thanks, Owen. So, Owen, Felix, if there are others who are familiar more deeply with Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, I'd like you to be thinking about that, have that in the back of your head as we're looking at these blessings and curses, because it seems to me that the Torah is intuitively reflecting that idea of what is the ascendancy of the priority of our needs. So we had food being fundamental. We talked about that. And the next verse, verse 5, expands on that there's talking not only that we'll have food, but we'll have abundance. So we read, your threshing shall overtake the vintage, and your vintage shall overtake the sowing. So in other words, before you can finish harvesting one crop, you'll be planting another. Just you'll be so busy with the production of food that there'll be no lag time in between. You shall eat your fill of bread, not only are you going to have food, but you're going to have as much as you want, and dwell securely in your land. So that's where I get to Maslow. So I'm interested to see how this correlates with Maslow, because the idea of physical safety and security also is one of those fundamental needs. So Felix put up a note for us. Felix, you want to read that?
According to Maslow, we have 5 categories of needs: physiological, safety, love, esteem, and self-actualization. In this theory, higher needs in the hierarchy begin to emerge when people feel they have sufficiently satisfied the previous need.
Excellent. So that's it. So physiological, we're talking about food.
Mhm.
And then once we have food, the next thing we want is safety. So the Torah is right on in verse 5 to say, you'll eat your fill of bread and dwell securely in your land.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's very correlated. When you work with poor children, and probably adults too, but I haven't had the honor, that becomes extremely important and relevant to everything you do, because, and it's why we put so much attention to feeding children in school when hunger is an issue, or food, what's the word? Food security is not secure. And also why many of the discipline programs that a lot of schools put in place with children are harmful are really damaging to poor kids, because they're not able to achieve those higher functions until the security is met. And they have to feel safe, and they have to feel secure that they're not going to be punished randomly for things that there have to be other ways to approach it, so that you don't step on those little egos that are trying to develop. So it's a really relevant place to be. And I think when the thought of homelessness and all the stuff we're hearing now about communities of color and communities that are poor faring so poorly with this COVID virus, a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're so busy meeting those first 2 or 3 needs, they never get up to the 4th and the 5th level. And you have to have one to build on the other.
David, welcome, and Owen wants to say something.
So the part about you'll have more than you need in terms of the self-actualization part. As a gardener, there are times when I say, I have way more vegetables than I can eat. And it feels like, aren't I cool? Okay, you get them. But it's a sense of real accomplishment and pride that, I'm like, I wasn't a gardener 20 years ago. I've learned how to do this. But the idea that it's not just that you have enough food, but that you also have a great deal of pride. And that's the self-actualization part of this. That wow, I'm really cool. I can do this.
But it's not just being cool. It's also taking charge.
Yes.
Taking control.
Yes.
Realizing that you have the control, and that if the supermarket's dried up,
I have some control.
Right.
I only have some control.
Okay.
Yesterday, I found a bunch of bad beetles eating my bok choy. Drove me nuts.
Oh,
Nerve.
really?
Yes.
We're the nerve of the beetles. Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's interesting now how much we're seeing that people are back into baking bread and making sourdough bread. And I guess maybe that just speaks to this idea that maybe we feel threatened physiologically, or we're insecure right now physiologically. So we're out there.
That's causing a big shortage of flour, though, for others. So
Yeah.
some are
But you can
can't get it, and
Yeah.
that's
I think the whole sourdough phenomenon is related to the lack of yeast. People can't find yeast.
right. Yeast is hard to get. Yeah.
But you can always use beer.
I just baked 2 loaves of sourdough bread this morning. I'll go show them to you before we
Sharing your sourdough bread then? No.
They're
My
gorgeous.
daughter Jessie has been doing a lot of baking. And for those of you who know Natalie Levy, yesterday and today she has done a massive bake sale to support St. Mary's Food Bank. I'm going to get in the car when we're done here and see if he's got anything left to go support the cause.
She says she has cookies.
She raised $3,700 in
Oh
her
my
first
God.
year.
Wow.
She was
She made
amazing.
granola and challah, which sold out immediately, and then 2 different kinds of cookies.
Nice.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Fantastic. God, how many oats did she have to buy?
Yeah, a lot of everything. There's mass quantity. So I wanted to just say one more thing about this. Eat your fill of bread. Va'achalta lachmechem lasova. Lasova is to your satisfaction. And that is echoed in the verse that we quote in the Birkat HaMazon, the blessing after the meal. V'achalta v'savata uve'rachta. You'll eat and be satisfied and give thanks. Uve'rachta, and bless. So you eat, you get full, you say thank you. That's the 3 legs on which our notion of food stands. And I think that this idea of eating, it's translated here as you'll eat your fill, but sava is to be full in the sense of satisfied, to feel like you have enough. And I think it's just an important point for us to consider for a moment, because for many of us, that in itself is a challenge. We eat for all kinds of other reasons besides feeling full and satisfied. And that just to consider for a moment that in itself is a kind of a blessing, to eat and to have a sense of satisfaction, so that we're not continuing to eat in an unconscious fashion because we never reach that point of feeling full and feeling satisfied. We're so disconnected from those processes. So just to consider that in itself is part of the blessing, is not only having enough, but also feeling connected enough to our body that we're aware of when we've had enough. So moving on then to verse 6, and the Torah is now expanding, moving from that physiological level to the safety level. I'll make peace in your land, and you will lay down untroubled. I'll turn back bad animals, chaya ra'ah, translated here as vicious beasts. I have another translation, evil beasts. Ra really is wicked or evil. I mean, that's kind of unfair to these animals, even like Owen's beetles. You know, they're not wicked or bad or evil. You know, they have a nature and they're behaving according to their nature. You know, that's their survival. But from this clearly is from the human perspective. So I'll make these evil beasts disappear from the land, and also the sword won't cross your land. So we won't be threatened on either front. We won't be threatened either from wild animals, and we won't be threatened from wild humans. So we're going to have a total sense of peace. The threat from wild animals, other than, you know, beetles eating our crops, and, you know, by the way, viruses consuming our lungs, for the most part, we have conquered this fear that was part of human life for so much of human history. I think it's probably, occasionally people worry now about coyotes coming into their yard and taking their pets, or what javelinas wreaking havoc in their yards. But we're not. I guess in Arizona, the occasional mountain lion or bobcat causes destruction. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about the rattlesnakes.
Oh,
Ron and I, we have encountered rattlesnakes, more than once out on the trail, mountain biking. But nevertheless, with all of that, I think we have largely, as a culture in contemporary America and in the contemporary world, conquered the fear of wild beasts compared to what that threat was for our ancestors.
There's a mountain lion in Sharon's neighborhood.
Yeah. There's a brown bear?
A mountain lion.
Oh, uh-huh.
No kidding.
Yeah, no, I hear you. But it's one mountain lion that is, I don't know, what's the feeling and the reaction? How did people generally view this interloper?
They take a picture of it and send it to Channel 15.
Yeah, it's not.
And run like out.
You can call animal control, I guess. But the fact is, we're crowding out territory that was theirs.
Right.
Well, the other night,
the
Sandy
greater
and I were
shark
walking.
attacks that are occurring is because of the difficulty and the sharks getting the food they need.
Oh,
We were
Shark
walking
attacks
the
are
other
up.
night and we ran across two javelina just chomping away on a neighbor's bushes. And then we came home and watched some TV, and Mr. Scorpion was walking across the front of the living room. So we're not completely away from wild animals.
Mom, do you know what a javelina is?
It's related to the wild pig. It looks like a wild pig, but
We'll
it's
send you
not.
a picture. They're pretty gross.
I was thinking, I doubt that I would see any wild animals here in the middle of Manhattan.
No, but you guys have those New York City rats that are.
The ones that pull
The
off
New York City
pizza.
rats like pizza. So how bad do
they're
they
about
be?
the same size.
Yeah.
Some of them are big.
Yeah, I mean, in some parts of Manhattan, I'm sure that's like a serious problem. But anyway, my point is that when we look at this promise that the Torah is making, that you won't be plagued by wild beasts, that you'll have a sense of security, we need to really project ourselves back into that environment and what that threat was like, that wild animals were a part of everyday life in a truly threatening and concerning manner. So this promise that you'll be free from that anxiety was meaningful in a way that maybe we have to think about how we could relate to that. Yes, Barry.
Is it possible that some of the angst that we're all going through, or many of us are going through with the coronavirus, is that for so many years, at least in my lifetime, I've always felt that we had some control of our environment in general, that if there was an illness, there'd be a cure. If there were all the things discussed here, that somehow we had control over this. And now we're faced with a situation where we're left feeling we have no control. We don't know when this will end. We don't know how it will end. We don't know what the new normal might be. We have, there's angst that the old normal will no longer exist anymore. I'm just wondering. That's all.
Absolutely. I think the lack of control, the inability to plan for the future is creating a tremendous amount of anxiety.
Yeah.
Yes, David.
Is it possible because so many of us are so removed from the land that we're having this? It's not bothering me as much as it is Sandy, but I know from my experience a virus gets into your chicken coop, you dump all the chickens and sterilize and do it again. Parasite gets into your larvae for your fish tanks. Very few survival, so you're going to dump the tank, sterilize, and start all over again. It's just a matter of what happens under high conditions of crowded conditions, and a virus or a parasite gets in. Sometimes there's nothing you can do but just start all over again. And I think maybe for a lot of people, no one's ever realized this happens, and sometimes it takes a season to get everything done and start all over again. And sometimes 2-3 seasons, and you don't know what the trigger, where the virus is, where the parasite's hiding, until you find that problem. And once you find the problem, you go back to normal.
I don't think so.
Unless we're the problem.
I think we're some of the problem. And the lack of control, we seem like we're heading for more control and respect for animal life and the balance of nature. And now with this virus, I think are focused on surviving ourselves rather than the balance of nature. But there's a correlation between this pandemic and pressure and the balance of nature, I guess is what.
I concur, but I also think that one of the things that has made me like perk up and just open up to this concept is convincing the demonstration to the American people, all over the world people, of what essential people are, that they're ordinary people who do the most ordinary jobs that keep us ready to do our fancy schmancy jobs. We can't do those jobs unless those ordinary people that we're all calling heroes today, and we'll probably forget about when this thing all ends. We may forget to the people in the grocery stores and the people who, everything. I mean, all the most ordinary things seem extremely important right now. And I hope that holds. I hope we continue to honor these people and to think differently about what matters and what doesn't matter, and what counts and what's big in our lives and what's not.
Yeah, it's a very interesting and important point, Terry, and I think it does correlate with where this parsha is going with the curses, that it's human nature. You know, you experience all these blessings, you get satisfied, and then you forget. And by the way, this idea of who counts, I've just been starting to think about, I'm doing a Devar Torah in the parsha of Bamidbar coming up in a couple of weeks. And, you know, Bamidbar exactly begins with the census and this idea of who counts, and everyone counts. And, you know, when you're in a tough situation, who can you count on? I put up also a favorite quote here as we're talking about the inner desire to live that propels every human creation, or every part of creation, I should say, you know, even to how, isn't it amazing how you'll see a beautiful flower growing out of the crack in the sidewalk? You know, what is nurturing that? But the instinct towards life is so built in. And when David was talking about, you know, viruses and their natural occurrence in the world, I thought about this quote from Suzuki Roshi. So this is for Terry, our Jew boo. And when he was diagnosed with cancer, his amazing quote was, "Well, it wants to live too." And that just always stayed with me very powerfully. You know, it's also part of nature and a living thing, and it wants to live just as much as I want to live. Not to say, Owen, that if I were you, I wouldn't be spraying my, Ron just got this organic bug spray that he's using on the plants. So he's feeling good about that, you know?
I use neem oil, which is a natural substance. It's from a plant, and it's not toxic to us, and it works. And I'm happy with that it's not some man-made chemical.
Yeah. I wanted to mention, I don't know if any of you are looking at the Eitz Chaim commentary on this verse, but it's very interesting. According to one homiletic interpretation, the reference is to humans acting viciously. So humans acting like wild beasts. Thus, peace in the land would mean internal peace between neighbors and between factions. So homiletic interpretation, not the literal sense of the text, but isn't that an interesting way to look at it, that we will be spared and saved from, it's like when we say humans are acting like animals, it's a negative statement about animals, because animals, even vicious animals, as I tried to say, are acting according to their nature. They're not malicious. I don't know that that animals have the capability to be malicious in the same way as humans, but to understand that one of the things that brings trouble in the land is human beings acting in vicious ways. And I wanted to read a little bit. So Rashi does not resolve the problem. I can't remember whose comment this was, but Rashi does not resolve the puzzle why strength and the ability to chase the enemy comes after security and peace, and not, as would logically fit, before achieving those. Ibn Ezra seems to respond to this question with one word that he adds after the phrase, I will grant peace, v'natati shalom ba'aretz, beinechem, among you. The strength to drive off your enemies would come if there first be peace and unity among you. So that's, again, that individual versus the communal reading, that in order to be able to drive off our enemies, we need to be able to work together. Each of us alone, we can't be armies of one. Remember that an army of one, the worst army recruiting slogan in the history of army recruiting slogans, an army of one. So Ibn Ezra is arguing against that. He's saying there's no such thing as an army of one.
Is peace?
A way to achieve peace and drive off our enemies is working together.
Is peace thy most precious gift? Is that true?
Is it the most precious gift, peace? That's an open question. It seems like, again, if we look at the hierarchy of needs and the blessings that the Torah is offering us, that peace is not the first thing mentioned. So the question is, would you rather starve under in a environment, or in a non-peaceful environment, or would you rather would you rather have enough food in a hostile environment, or would you rather have you know what I'm trying to say?
They're too closely related. You can't have peace without having had food. You can't. People are not at peace when they're looking for food and they're looking for shelter. They are not capable of feeling peace. Peace is a gift. At least it is to me. It's a gift to those of us who have enough. When you don't have enough, it's just that Mahatma Gandhi, peace is a slice of bread. You can't separate them. You can't.
No, but doesn't war actually ravage the world and create a bigger problem for everything else, including food, because those areas that are ravaged tend not to be able, they lose the ability to feed themselves. They wind up in abject poverty through destruction. So,
Well, not necessarily for the victor, though. The victor typically is feasting on the spoils.
yeah, but we've got a world where it doesn't seem to be any real victory for anybody, particularly like the Middle East. It's just winding down of destruction.
I think that there are probably many people in the world who would see the United States as the aggressive victor feasting on the spoils of their countries.
Possibly, yeah, that's true. It's all a matter of perspective, I guess.
Right. And I'm thinking, as we're having this conversation about North Korea and how that, that population has been truly starved to the point of malnutrition and death. And in fact, there are concerns as to whether or not they could even mount a fighting force, because the people have been so impacted by the lack of food that it's affecting the physiological and cognitive functioning of so much of the population.
Cool. That's interesting, yeah.
So 6 specific blessings are mentioned. Economic prosperity arising from one's own self-sufficient land, not depending on import. Security, freedom from fear. We didn't really focus on that, the psychological value of having a sense of security, being able to go to sleep without worry and without fear. That's a huge thing. Peace in the land, strength and valor to overcome one's enemies. Increase of population in numbers through a high birth rate, which we're going to see, and ultimately God's presence among the people. But being able to lie down in security, I'm just thinking about being at Abu Ghraib prison during a time when it was, actively under fire. And the fact that my chaplain assistant, who in the Army, chaplains are considered non-combatants, so we're not allowed to bear arms. We have a chaplain assistant who travels with us and functions as our bodyguard. And when we were visiting Abu Ghraib to celebrate Passover with the soldiers who were assigned there, they wanted to put me and my chaplain assistant in 2 separate rooms across an open courtyard. And of course, you couldn't go outside even across that courtyard there without what we called, full battle rattle, the helmet and the body armor and, the whole thing. And Sergeant Alejos said, I can't protect her if I'm, 5 minutes away and across an open courtyard. And he laid his sleeping bag down on the floor next to my cot with his M16 so that I could lay down in security and know that, he was right there if anything happened in the night. So again, just another image that comes to me when we talk about being able to lie down unafraid. It's not something that all too easily taken for granted.
It just struck me that that's probably what that means in the 23rd Psalm. You help me to lie down in green pastures.
Yes.
To sleep in safety.
Terry, you were going to say something?
I don't know. I forgot.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, it's okay. We have only a couple of more minutes.
I said Hashki Venu. That's what I
Yes, there you go. Same idea. Perfect. Great minds think alike. So let's just, I wanted to read one more commentary on this verse. It's verse 6. It's from Pliskin. The title, if you have it in front of you, says, "Be happy for the good fortune of others." It's Pliskin, page 301. One more comment about this. "And I will place peace in the land." Rashi states, if there is no peace, there is nothing. There are many people who would really feel satisfied with what they themselves already have, but because they see that others have more, they feel envious of those people. They actually feel pain when they see that someone else has what they do not. But when a person feels sincere love for someone else, he is not envious of that person, and it does not bother him if that person has more than him. Therefore, the only way for people to really experience a total blessing with what the Almighty has given them is for there to be true peace among people. This is the peace in which people feel love for one another and are happy for their good fortune. The only way you will be able to enjoy what you have is to master the attitude of feeling good for the good fortune of others. Envy prevents you from living life to its fullest. The more joy you feel for others, the better your own quality of life. Rabbi Banish Rosenbaum, who spent many hours studying with the Novominster Rebbe, Rabbi Nachum Mordechai Perlo, wrote, his face would light up with joy whenever he learned of the success of someone else's undertaking. A Rebbe attracted a host of new followers, marvelous. The yeshiva expanded his institution, wonderful. Another's triumph was the most precious of occurrences. So just a final thought on how we might understand that sense of peace that we enjoy. I think somebody's at my door. Talk among yourselves. I'll be right back.
Fred.
Oh, nice.
They're so beautiful.
Pass one through virtually. Okay.
Yeah, it looks good.
I know. This one is apricot walnut, and I can't wait.
Nice.
I can't wait to eat it.
Has anyone ever
That
tried
reminds me
grinding their
of,
own bread?
when we were doing the 10 Commandments, and it's so important about do not covet. Because this is the flip side of do not covet.
Yeah.
Not only don't covet, but actually take joy in someone else's accomplishments.
Yeah, that's one step. It seems it's one step above.
Has anyone ever tried to grind their own bread? Because that using the old mortar and pestle or grinding wheels.
You need to do what I just did. Took about, I would say, 3/4 of a 5-pound bag of flour. I would not want to grind that in a mortar and pestle, but they do make machines. They do make a gadget that'll grind wheat. So you can buy whole grain wheat and you can grind it to whatever condition you like.
If you get a chance, next time you're in Israel, at the Biblical Archaeological area, they have old mills and
grinding wheels.
And you get a sense of how much work went into grinding a small amount of wheat to make your daily bread.
Exactly.
And it really, you're almost putting out as much energy to grind it as you are to make. And that's why we developed water wheels and donkeys and them to do the work.
Slaves did a good job too.
Actually, slaves were too expensive. It was cheaper to use a donkey than a slave.
I don't know. They used slaves that were in trouble. They put them on the wheel. That's what that's all about.
That's one interpretation. The other interpretation, that the cost to feeding a slave is higher than in the work output than you get for running a donkey or an ox. So sometimes slave work was more expensive than using.
Yeah, but it was worth it.
All right. I see you've gone a little
Experience?
astray in my absence. I will say, you know, when you look at the Psalms, you know, to be anointed with fragrant oil, it's the, you know, the parallel. You know, if you think about what the process is to harvest, to cure, to pit, and to press olives to make oil, you understand why that is such a precious, precious commodity. Oseh shalom b'mromav, Booyah aseh shalom.
Amen.
Lovely to see everyone. Happy Mother's Day to the mothers.
Happy Mother's Day.
All right. Well, see
Same
you
to
soon.
all of you.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good baking.